Learn grammar, practice grammar. To speak excellent English, you need to do both. And that's what this video is going to help you with. This video teaches you to listen, learn, and speak on these advanced English grammar features. Let's begin with negative inversion. And let's follow that pattern of listen, learn, and then speak. Let's begin with listen. You're going to hear me say a short dialogue, but there are some gaps in the text. Can you identify what the gaps in the text are? Never have I seen such a beautiful sunset. Little did I think I would ever see the sky so red. Which words fill the gaps? They are these. Never have I seen, little did I think. Notice that the negative words go at the beginning here. Never have, little did. And this is a feature called negative inversion. To add emphasis to a negative, move the negative word to the front of the sentence and place an auxiliary verb after it, which is what happened in the first example. An ordinary sentence might be, I have never seen such a beautiful sunset. But with negative inversion, this becomes, never have I seen such a beautiful sunset. Never is the negative word, have is the auxiliary, then the subject, then the main verb. And the effect of moving never to the beginning of the sentence is to put more emphasis on it. If you want to really give impact to the negative in this situation, you can do this. There are other ways to achieve negative inversion too. Other words that you can use include little and hardly. Little means almost nothing. For instance, little did I think I would ever see the sky so red. What did I think? Almost nothing in terms of the chances of seeing the sky so red. Hardly focuses more on time. Hardly had I arrived when dinner was served. This means almost no time had passed before dinner was served. Another word you can use is scarcely, and this can go in the place of either little or hardly. So now we have learnt the negative inversion rules. Let's practice speaking them. First of all, let's repeat the model I gave you earlier. I will say each part and then you repeat. Never have I seen such a beautiful sunset. Your turn. Little did I think I would ever see the sky so red. You repeat. And now another speaking task, but here you fill in the gaps with your own ideas. This helps you to take the grammar and make it personal and useful to your own situation. So look at the dialogue boxes again and think for a moment about how you may fill the gaps. Never have I. Little did I think I. Then I'm going to give you 15 seconds on your own to speak using these prompts and your own ideas. If you find this video useful, you can like it, subscribe to the channel or share. And if you want to make sure you get all of my videos, after you click on the subscribe button, click the arrow on the right and then select all. This will make sure you are notified every time I release a new video. Let's move on to much as a subject. First, listen which words fill the gaps. Do you know anything about the history of Antarctica? Much has been written about it, but it doesn't interest me. Which words filled the gaps here? They were, do you know anything? And much has been. Notice that much here appears on its own without another noun before the verb. And that's a feature that we can use in English. Much can be the subject of a sentence without another noun, meaning a great amount. But something to notice is that it is usually used with a passive verb. That means a verb that's in the passive form. Much has been written about the subject. So much here means a great amount, and has been written is a passive form, meaning that someone else did it. Someone else did the writing. And that's a typical situation in which we would use much as a subject. Now, much can be an object as well. And when it's an object, it doesn't matter so much whether we're using the active or passive form. For instance, I haven't studied much this year. How much have you studied? Not a great amount. So let's practice speaking using this model. Listen to me, then repeat. Do you know anything about the history of Antarctica? Much has been written about it, but it doesn't interest me. And now let's make this grammar feature personal to you. Let's look at the same dialogues again, but this time you need to fill the gaps with your own ideas. Do you know anything about? And then add something. And then complete the second part with much has been, followed with your own ideas. You have 15 seconds, but you can pause the video or play it more slowly if you need more time. The next grammar point is how, followed by an adverb and an inverted clause. As usual, we'll begin with the listening. Which words fill the gaps in this dialogue? The thunderstorm came out of nowhere. How quickly did the weather change? We didn't expect so much rain. Which words fill the gaps here? Came out of nowhere. How quickly did. And let's focus on this last structure, how quickly did. This forms an exclamation, and an exclamation can be made from the structure how, followed by an adverb, followed by the inverted clause. So a normal sentence might be, the weather changed quickly. But to turn it into an exclamation, we can do this. How quickly did the weather change? How puts more emphasis on the word quickly. Quickly becomes amplified here. Then we follow with an auxiliary. Here, did is used to represent the past simple. So instead of changed, the main verb now takes the infinitive form change because the tense falls on did. And this is a technique you can use to make something into an exclamation. Normally, we would use how as a question form. But here we're not asking a question. We are saying that something perhaps is surprising or something is worthy of considerable note. How quickly did the weather change? Let's look at a couple more examples. How long have they taken to get here? They should have arrived by now. So we're not asking a question. How long have they taken? No. Here we are exclaiming. How long have they taken to get here? They have taken so long. Or perhaps in the example of a boxer. Have you ever seen boxers before a fight? They look confident usually, don't they? They look like they're going to win. And you might say this, how confidently did the boxer enter the ring? So again, how begins, confidently is our adverb, did is the auxiliary for the past, and then the rest of the sentence comes after. But the verb is in the infinitive form here because of did. So we've listened, we've learned. Now let's practice speaking with this structure. First, let's repeat that dialogue. Listen to me and then repeat. The thunderstorm came out of nowhere. How quickly did the weather change? We didn't expect so much rain. And now you have 15 seconds to complete the same dialogue, but with your own ideas. First, think of something that came out of nowhere in your own experience or from your own thoughts. And then in the second part of the dialogue, how adverb did, and complete the rest of the sentence with your own thoughts. And if you're new to the channel, let me tell you about a course that I have on Udemy called Advanced English Grammar, which is for advanced English learners, which will take you to a higher level of English. It contains lessons on difficult grammar, tests and exercises with downloadable PDFs. There's over 10 hours of video on it with teaching from me. There's a link in the video description which you can find below this video pane here. Let's move on to the next grammar point, which is mixed conditionals. Again, listen and decide which words fill the gaps. If you got a new job, you might have to move house. If you know a nice house I can buy, you should tell me about it. Which words fill the gaps here? They were filled as follows. If you got a new job, you might have to move house. If you know a nice house I can buy, you should tell me about it. What do you notice that's different about these conditionals? Normally, with conditionals in the past tense, we expect to use would, and conditionals with the present tense, we expect to use will. Not here. Let's find out why. Let's first of all look at the first conditional. The first conditional usually uses will in the clause without if. However, other modals are possible, starting with should. If you know, you should tell me. Here, should introduces advice based upon a condition. So the condition is if you know, if you can say yes to that, then we go to the advice. You should tell me. Not you will tell me, because that's certainty. This is a recommendation instead. Or we could use could or might to introduce a possible option. If you run, you might catch the bus. If we said you will catch the bus, then there's certainty that you will run fast enough and eventually reach the bus before it leaves. But if you say you might catch the bus, what you mean here is there's a possibility. If you run, and the answer to that is yes, there's a possibility that you will reach the bus before it leaves. So that's the first conditional, but also we can use mixed conditionals with the second conditional too. Now, the second conditional usually uses would in the clause without if. However, could or might indicate a possible hypothetical option. For example, here, if you found a pot of gold, you could leave your job. So the condition is if you found a pot of gold, we use the past simple because we think it's unlikely. But if the answer to that is yes, then there's a possibility you could leave your job. If you said you would leave your job, then that means that is the automatic or the certain consequence of this condition being met. But here we don't want a certain consequence, we're just giving a possible consequence instead. So let's practice speaking using these structures. First of all, repeat after me each time. If you got a new job, you might have to move house. If you know a nice house I can buy, you should tell me about it. Now let's practice these same conditionals, but this time complete with your own ideas. Start with if I got a new job I might, And then in the second dialogue, if you, followed by you should. Use the present simple in the second dialogue. The next grammar point is don't you, followed by a verb and then that. Let's start with the listening. Which words fill the gaps? I went to the cafe, but it was closed. Don't you know that it is closed on Sundays? The gaps are filled as follows. Don't you know that it is closed on Sundays? Now, what's interesting about this question is that we don't actually expect an answer here. And let me explain. This is something what's called a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is a question where you don't expect an answer. You're asking the question for effect instead. Usually to tell someone, I actually expected you to know this. I'm surprised that you didn't know this. Now, how do we make this rhetorical structure with don't? Well, you can use auxiliary, followed by the subject, then the verb, then that, then the clause. As we saw in the dialogue, don't you know that the cafe is closed on Sundays? The statement is all at the end. The cafe is closed on Sundays. It could have been a sentence on its own. But by adding, don't you know that, what we're really saying is, I expected you to know this. Don't is the auxiliary, you is the subject, know is the main verb, and that introduces the next clause. Another example is, haven't you heard that the opening times have changed? Have auxiliary, you subject, heard verb, and that introduces the main clause. When we use the verb to be, another possibility opens up as well. Instead of using the verb after the subject, we can use an adjective instead. And in this case, to be becomes the main verb at the beginning of the sentence, even though we often consider it to be an auxiliary in this position. So, are you aware that the menu has changed in the restaurant? Well, here are, to be is normally an auxiliary verb. Here it acts as the main verb. You is the subject. Aware is an adjective this time, and that introduces the rest of the sentence. Let's practice this dialogue first before we practice with our own ideas. Repeat after me. I went to the cafe, but it was closed. Don't you know that it is closed on Sundays? And now complete with your own ideas. I went to the, think of somewhere that you go, but think of something that happened. And then think of an appropriate response starting, don't you know that? It needs to be something which you would expect the other person to know. 15 seconds. Next, we're going to look at many, followed by are, and then followed by a noun. Listen as usual. There are going to be some gaps in the dialogue. You need to decide which words go in the gaps. The school has been here for 100 years. Many a child has studied here. Yes, many have passed their exams in this building. The words that filled the gaps were as follows. Many a child has studied here. Many have passed their exams in this building. Notice the difference in the tense here. Many a child has, many have. Let's start off by focusing on that structure, many a. Instead of using a lot of with a plural noun, we can use many a or many an followed by a singular noun instead. So the example, a lot of children have passed exams at this school. Children is a plural form. Instead, we could say many a child has passed exams at this school. The meaning is exactly the same, but after many a, we use a singular rather than a lot of with the plural. We couldn't do the same with a lot of. We couldn't say a lot of a child, but we can say many a child, meaning the same. Many can also be a subject without a noun, and here we do use the plural verb afterwards. Many have passed exams at this school, and this simply means a lot of people, a lot of children. Let's practice speaking with these two structures. Listen to me, then repeat after each part of the dialogue. The school has been here for 100 years. Many a child has studied here. Yes, many have passed their exams in this building. Now your turn. And now let's speak. Use this grammar again, but fill it with your own ideas. In the first part of the dialogue, many are, with the singular verb has. And then in the second part, many have. So we have the plural form of have here. Cleft sentences can be tricky to use properly. Let's go through the same structure of listening, then the lesson, and then speaking, with the form of it followed by that. So listen for the gaps in this dialogue. The school is believed to be the best in the area. Yes, it is believed that the school is better than any other. Which words filled the gaps? Listen again. Now you can see the gaps filled. The school is believed to be the best in the area. Yes, it is believed that the school is better than any other. What's happened when we use it here? Well, a clause beginning with it can be used to draw attention to particular parts of a sentence. So in the example in the dialogue, it is believed draws attention to the fact people believe something. But we could pick different parts of the sentence and focus on those too. Let's imagine this is our original sentence. This is the best school in the area. There's two bits of information at the end of this sentence. Best school and the area. And we can emphasize either one of those by placing the information after it. So if we want to emphasize the school, then we can say it is the school that is the best in the area. Or if we want to emphasize the area, we could say it is in this area that this school is the best. So it enables us to draw information from later in the sentence, bring it to the start of the sentence to show this is the bit of information I really want to communicate with you the most. So let's practice speaking using this structure. I will say each part, then repeat. The school is believed to be the best in the area. Your turn. Yes, it is believed that the school is better than any other. And now complete similar sentences but using your own ideas. So in the first part of the dialogue, the something is believed to be the best in the area. Perhaps think of your own area where you live. Is something the best where you live? And then in the second part of the dialogue, use it is to emphasize one part of that sentence. 15 seconds start now. Now, it may have been difficult to think of something, so please take as long as you need to complete this task. But if you have completed it, move with me now to the next grammar point, which is using the passive followed by the word with instead of by. Listen to this dialogue. There's going to be gaps in it. Think about the words that fill the gaps. How did they manage to clean that high window? It was cleaned with a long brush. Not many gaps here. Did you get it? It was cleaned with a long brush. Now, why did we use with here instead of by? Normally we have by after a passive form. For example, if we start with the sentence, Roy cleaned the window, we would make this passive by saying the window was cleaned by Roy. So usually the passive form is followed with by and then the actor. In other words, the person who did the activity. The actor is the person who did the activity, which here is Roy. But we don't always use by. We might use with for this reason. To introduce the item that did something, use with after the passive form. The window was cleaned with a long brush. So here we're not talking about the person who did the activity, but we're talking about something through which the activity happened. The long brush. The long brush didn't do the activity, but it was used to complete it. So in the passive form, when we are not talking about the actor, but something else that made the activity possible, we can often use with. So let's practice speaking with that passive form with now. I'll say each part, you repeat. How did they manage to clean that high window? It was cleaned with a long brush. Now your ideas. Make a question, how did they? And then in the answer, use a passive form, it was, and then use with to introduce something that enabled the activity to happen. Our next grammar point is looking at modals for the future. Listen and identify the words that go in the gaps in this dialogue. Will you go tonight? I might go. I should go. I know some other people who could go too. Which words fill the gaps this time? Will you go tonight? I might go. I should go. I know some other people who could go too. Normally we use will for the future, but notice we've used some other modals for the future here as well. Let's explore this further. So the most common modal, as I mentioned, for the future is will, and this indicates certainty about a future event or activity in most of its future uses. So I will go means there is certainty about this action. I'm giving you certainty about what I'm going to do in the future. I will go. However, many modals can be used for the future with slightly different emphases. Let's introduce some here. I might go is a possible future action. I could go is also a possible future action. And I should go is a recommended future action. Let's practice using these modals for the future in the dialogue, and then in a moment you will have a chance to use your own ideas. Repeat after me. Will you go tonight? I might go. I should go. I know some other people who could go too. And now use your own ideas. Make a question with will you, and then answer it with might and should. Another area of grammar that can cause confusion is where you have a main verb followed by a gerund, but that same main verb can also be followed by an infinitive, and that can lead to a meaning change. See if you could spot it in this example, but there are gaps in it. What are the gaps? Why didn't they try to open the door? They couldn't open it even though they had tried using every key. Which words fill the gaps here? Why didn't they try to open the door? They couldn't open it even though they had tried using every key. Notice the difference here. Try to open is try followed by to an infinitive. And tried using is the verb try followed by the gerund form. And there's a very subtle change of meaning when you switch between the gerund and the infinitive here. Let's explore that further. Some verbs change meaning depending upon whether they are followed by a gerund or an infinitive. Here are 3 examples. They tried to open the door. They tried using every key. When they tried to open a door, it means they made an effort to open the door. They put force into it. But tried using is slightly different. This means experimented. Different things happened so that they could make it happen. Tried using doesn't mean they push as hard as they can or they pull as hard as they can. It means they had different ideas to solve the problem. Another verb that changes is stopped. They stopped drinking. That means the drinking ended. But they stopped to have a drink means the drinking started. In the second one, they stopped and then the next activity begins. So if you ever see they stopped to, then the part after to is the bit that they start afterwards. Remember also changes meaning. They remembered to call, they remembered calling. If you say they remembered to call, then the call happens after remembering. They remembered something, then they call. But they remembered calling, then they're remembering something from before. They remember in their mind something from the past. So that's how the infinitive and the gerund change here. Let's practice using this change of meaning with try. First of all, repeat the dialogue after me. Why didn't they try to open the door? They couldn't open it even though they had tried using every key. Now it's time to use this grammar in your own way. Think of something that you're trying to do at the moment and think of something that you experimented with in the past. So at the moment I'm trying to. What are you using effort to achieve? In the past I tried. What experiment did you do that didn't work? Okay, let's now explore articles. Now there are lots and lots of rules for articles, but I'm going to focus on one today, and that is using articles with something called ordinals, which we'll come to in a moment. Let's start by listening to a dialogue with some gaps. Think about the words that fill these gaps. The first meal I ever cooked was rice and cabbage. The next was a burger. First you boil the rice. Next you add the cabbage, last you drain the water. Which words did you hear for the gaps? The first meal, the next, first and next. Now notice sometimes first and next have an article before them, the, and sometimes they don't. Why is this? Well, usually we do use the before ordinals, and ordinals are words that have some sort of numerical value. First, second, third, next, last. And we saw that in the example. The first meal I ever cooked was rice and cabbage. The next was a burger. What's perhaps more interesting is looking at the exceptions to this. We don't use an article when using ordinals to make a sequence. Look at the first example in red. First you boil the rice, next you add the cabbage. We're creating a sequence. First, next, last. First, secondly, third. First, second, third. We also don't use an article at the end of sentences when we're trying to identify an order. Look at the second example here. What are you going to cook first? The question wants to find out the order. Which is first? That might imply which is second. And also in some preposition phrases we don't use the article either. The swimmer finished in first place. Not in the first place, but just in first place. And there are many preposition phrases like that where we don't use the. Let's practice speaking with this structure. First of all, repeat the dialogue after me. The first meal I ever cooked was rice and cabbage. The next was a burger. First you boil the rice, next you add the cabbage, last you drain the water. Now your own ideas. Can you think back to the first meal that you ever cooked? Use those ideas to fill the gaps in this dialogue. Now we're going to look at one aspect of the causative, where we have the verb have, but then we also have to afterwards, which makes a slight difference. Listen to the dialogue first. There will be some gaps. What are they? What did you do last Sunday? I had my family to my house for dinner. Which words filled the gaps? I had my family to my house for dinner. What's the impact of using this word to here? So when we use this structure, have, followed by someone, followed by to, and then a noun, it does the following. It means that someone does something at your request. Slightly more than that, though, it often means that someone comes to you at your request. Now, I said someone here, there can be more than one person, which is true in the example that follows. I had my family to my house for dinner. So had, then my family is the people, then to, then the noun my house. So when we use to here, it often means we've requested people to come to you in some sort of way. Let's practice speaking using this structure. Repeat after me. What did you do last Sunday? I had my family to my house for dinner. Now try using this grammar using your own ideas. The first part of the dialogue is done for you. Tell me about when you invited people to your home. The second part of the dialogue is the response. Can you think of ideas to fill this? I had, then the people, then to, and then the rest of the sentence. Let's look at the difference between some transitive and intransitive verbs, where the verb is the same but can be transitive or intransitive in different situations, leading to a meaning change. Look at the examples here, but fill in the gaps as I speak. I don't want to give up burgers, but the doctor says I must. I know you want to be healthy, but it's too hard. Why don't you give up? Which words fill the gaps here? I don't want to give up burgers. Why don't you give up? So we have give up twice, but the meaning is slightly different. And the reason is because in the first sentence, give up is followed by a noun. And in the second part, give up is not followed by anything at all. Let's look at this in more detail. So some verbs switch from transitive to intransitive with a meaning change. I run a shop in the city. Well, this is transitive because words come after run. It has a noun, an object after it. I run a shop in the city. That's transitive. The second example, I am running. There's nothing after it. Intransitive verbs do not have an object afterwards. They could have some adverb information or prepositional phrases, but they don't have an object. Now, normally a verb is either transitive or intransitive, but some can be both depending on the situation. And the verbs I'm going to show you here change meaning when they change from transitive to intransitive. Run, when it is transitive, means I'm the owner of the thing that I mentioned. I run a shop means I'm the owner of the shop. But I am running doesn't mean ownership at all. It simply means my legs are moving and they're moving fast. Now, the following looks at the example we had in the dialogue. I give up. I can't solve the puzzle. Here, give up is intransitive. There's no object afterwards, and this means stop trying. I give up, I stop trying. But she gave up her seat for an elderly man. Here, gave up is followed by an object, her seat, and so here it is transitive. And this means she voluntarily lost something. One more example. Next week I am moving. Let's move the furniture into another room. In the intransitive example, I am moving, what I mean is I change where I live. You change where you live. But in the transitive example, let's move the furniture, then you mean that you change the location of that furniture. So a subtle change in meaning there. Let's practice using the grammar to do with give up in the dialogues. You repeat after me. I don't want to give up burgers, but the doctor says I must. I know you want to be healthy, but it's too hard. Why don't you give up? And now with your own ideas. I don't want to give up, followed by something that you don't want to give up. And I'm more than happy to give up, followed by something that you are happy to give up. Now let's look at verbs for senses. There are two types of verbs for senses. But first of all, let's listen to an example. See if you can spot the verbs for senses in this dialogue and the difference between them. Are you listening to classical music? Yes, it sounds really good. Which words fill the gaps here? Are you listening to classical music? Yes, it sounds really good. Now, listen and sound is all about the noise that reaches your ears and goes in your ears. But there's a slight difference here. Notice that one has an ing at the end and one doesn't. Let's start with the verbs that don't have ing. Many verbs for senses are used for the information you receive through your eyes, ears and nose. These are usually state verbs. So see, smells, sounds. Here, these are all state verbs. They don't appear in the ing form. And what it means is the information is received. You haven't done anything to receive the information. It's just automatically reached your eyes, or automatically reached your mouth, or automatically reached your ears. But some verbs for senses are different. Some verbs for senses describe the activities you perform in order to get information through your eyes, ears, or nose. And these can be used in the continuous form. So I am looking at the view. So the information reaches your eyes, but you're doing something deliberately to make sure you're happening. For example, you're looking there, not there. I am listening to the music. Yes, the noise reaches your ears, but you have perhaps put headphones on to make sure that you can do that. And a dog is sniffing near a rabbit hole. Yes, the dog smells something, but they do something with their nose to make sure they can smell. Okay, speaking practice. Repeat after me. Are you listening to classical music? Yes, it sounds really good. Now complete with your own ideas. I enjoy listening to, complete with something that you enjoy listening to. And think about this. From where I am sitting, I can see. What can you see? Make a dialogue with what you can see. And here's another structure that is useful to know. To be followed by of, followed by a noun. Start by listening and identifying the words that go in the gaps. Why don't you sell that old sewing machine? It is of use to the workers in the factory. Did you catch the words that went in the gap? It is of use to the workers in the factory. It is of use to. Now, why did I use it is of use to? Why didn't I just say it is useful? Well, this is to make the statement a little bit more formal. Sometimes a more formal alternative to be followed by adjective is instead to say to be followed by of and the noun. What I mean by to be here is the form of the verb to be that's necessary. For example, they told me it was interesting can become they told me it was of interest. So in the first example, we have interesting as an adjective. And in the second, it was of interest. Was is to be, of, and then interest is the noun that replaces interesting. It makes it more formal. Or, the machine is useful to the employees. Useful is an adjective here, but we could also say the machine is of use to the employees. So it's a useful little construction that you can use to be a bit more formal with your English. It doesn't always work though. This tends only to work when you can convert an adjective into a noun with the same root. So notice that interesting was replaced with interest. They come from the same word. The root is interest, but the adjective form has that ing as well. Also, it tends only to work when an activity on the noun before is implied. So the following example would not work. The review was critical does not convert into the review was of criticism, because criticism doesn't imply an activity on the review. But if you look at the examples at the top of the screen, they do. They told me it was of interest. So here, people are interested in it. The machine is of use to the employees. Employees find the machine useful. So there's an activity on the subject before it which is implied by the context of the sentence, and that needs to be present. Finally, C, another way to test whether you can use to be followed by of followed by the noun is think, can you do this? Can you optionally add to followed by someone at the end of the sentence? In the example in red, we already have it. The machine is of use to the employees. So we could add to the employees here. The employees find it useful. We could also have done it to the sentence in blue. They told me it was of interest to people who visit. So people who visit found it interesting. So if you can add to and then the people who use it as an activity, then you can probably use this form. Let's practice speaking with the original dialogue before you use your own ideas. Repeat after me. Why don't you sell that old sewing machine? It is of use to the workers in the factory. And now complete with your own ideas. Places of interest in my country are, think of some places. And things of use in my house include, think of some things in your house which are useful to you. A useful bit of grammar to know is I wish you would. Let's start by listening to a dialogue, fill in the gaps. Do you want to hear about my exciting weekend? Oh, I wish you would stop talking about it. I've heard the story 10 times. These are the words that filled the gaps. Do you want to hear about my exciting weekend? Oh, I wish you would stop talking about it. I've heard the story 10 times. So here we use I wish and we use would in combination. But what does this do to the meaning of I wish? Well, if you say I wish followed by a subject, which tends to be a pronoun, but it could be anything, and then followed by would, what you mean is that you want the subject to do something in the future. So when we say, I wish you would stop talking about it, what you mean is, I want you to stop doing this after now. Unlike most wishes, this is something where there is often a realistic possibility that it could happen. Something is true at the moment and you want it to change. But it's usually something outside of your control. It's something that you want someone else to do. So it's a wish because you want them to follow your instruction, but you can't make them. I wish you would. I wish he would. I wish she would. It could even be, I wish the something would. Let's practice this in a speaking exercise. First of all, let's go through that dialogue again. Listen to me, then repeat. Do you want to hear about my exciting weekend? Oh, I wish you would stop talking about it. I've heard the story 10 times. Now it's your turn to put your own ideas into the gaps. So you're making the grammar personal, something that relates to something true in your life. It'll help you remember it. So first of all, I wish something, then would. It could be you, could be he, could be she, something else. And then think of another one. And I wish something would. And then the bit that comes after would is the bit that you want the subject to change in. So think of something to say in both parts of the dialogue. You've got 15 seconds. And now our last grammar point for this video. Such or so. Before we look at the differences between these words, let's listen to a dialogue with these words in. But again, there are gaps. The party was so good. I spoke to all of my friends there. I'm glad you had such a good time. So which words went in the gaps here? The party was so good. I spoke to all of my friends there. I'm glad you had such a good time. Can you work out the difference between so and such just from this dialogue? Well, let me help you. Such goes with nouns or noun phrases. For instance, I had such a good time. Here, time is the noun. It could be a noun on its own, or it could be a noun phrase that has an adjective and an article beforehand, but there must be a noun here. I had such a good time. So goes with adjectives. The party was so good. There's no noun here. Good is an adjective. And so and such are really intensifying the words that come after. It wasn't just a good time. It was such a good time. Intensified, a high level of good time. The party wasn't just good, it was so good. Let's practice speaking. Repeat after me. The party was so good. I spoke to all of my friends there. Your turn. I'm glad you had such a good time. Your turn. And now complete with your own ideas. In the first dialogue, I had such a good time at. So think about a place where you had a good time recently. And in the second part, and the something was so good. Think about something else that was so good, perhaps connected to the first part of the dialogue. 15 seconds starts now. So, when you're learning grammar, remember to do these three things. Make sure you listen to the grammar in natural use, learn the grammar as it should be used, and speak out the grammar. Today, we've listened to the grammar in sentences which I have written, so you know they are sentences that native speakers may use. You've learned the meanings of the grammar, all of the different grammar points listed on the screen here. And we practiced speaking the grammar. First of all, you had an opportunity to speak using a model that I provided, so you know it's accurate. And then you had a chance to speak using the grammar in a personal way. And that's what you need to get to eventually. You need to be able to not only know the grammar, but speak out the grammar in ways that fit your context, that are meaningful to you, that describe your life or your situations. So if you look at any of these grammar points on the left now and you think, actually, I need to study these again, go back to the video and find the place in the video where these points are covered and try it again.